The Australian government is to introduce the toughest laws in the world when it comes to online trolling, with individuals and social media platforms facing huge fines now for failing to remove abusive material.
Well, one of the people who is key to lobbying for this historic move is Channel 9 presenter Erin Molan, who's frequently been the victim of horrific online abuse, frankly, fearing one vile troll in particular, who tweeted when she was pregnant that she would deliver a stillborn baby and die. I mean, Erin, absolutely disgusting. Now, you actually managed to... Very good morning to you, by the way, and thank you for joining us. This is extremely important. It's also very distressing. You managed to take action against that individual, didn't you?
I did, and good morning to you, Susanna, and to you, Piers, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm really passionate about this topic, and thank you for giving it some of your very valuable time. Look, that's just one example, and there have been plenty of them, and I'm going to start this interview by saying, because I know what you're like, Piers, and you too, Susanna, I am not a snowflake on any level. I'm in the public eye, and it is part and parcel that I'm going to be criticised. People are going to be mean about me. People are going to think that I'm ugly. People are not going to like what I do. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. But what started to get to me was when it crossed a line and there was absolutely nothing that could be done about it. And that example you just showed, I reported that to Facebook, and the initial response from Facebook was, "We do not deem this to be offensive." He then started to send repetitive messages. I went to the police and they said, well, under these laws, which, to be honest, are quite archaic, they haven't kept up with technology, it had to be a repeat of you know, up to 10 times, and it had to be this particular box had to be ticked, and it was just so frustrating that something that in the real world you could prosecute someone for, you could charge someone for, in the online world, it was an absolute free-for-all, and the whole narrative surrounding online bullying, and again, I say I'm not a snowflake. This is not about someone not liking me or writing critical things online. This is about death threats. This is about threatening to rape my 2-year-old daughter. The whole narrative surrounding this, and particularly with children in primary schools, was all about coping mechanisms for victims. That doesn't exist in any other area when it comes to this kind of issue. If someone punches you in the street, we don't focus on the victim and say, don't worry about them. Let's help you. If there's domestic violence, we don't say to the victim, don't worry about it. Let's just help you, don't worry about them. We punish the perpetrators. There are consequences for actions. That's why most people don't murder, most people don't rob, because there are consequences. In the online world, they just don't exist. And the social media companies, they're complicit in this.
Well, they
so
are,
these legislation and these new laws.
They are, Erin, and they're not guided by the same, or governed by the same regulations of regular publishers. So if a newspaper was to publish this in Australia or the UK, all hell would break loose in terms of regulatory punishments. But they just glide above all this, these social media platforms.
Because they're not publishers, they're platforms.
Yeah, and as more and more people have gone on to Twitter and Facebook, so I've seen a real exponential rise in really vile abuse, the kind of thing that no one would ever say to your face. When I've read some of the things that were being said to you, and the irony of this is you're married to a police officer. He's a detective.
He's a homicide detective too.
A homicide detective.
He's only used to dealing with dead bodies, so he's not much
so,
use.
I mean, you know, you must have had the conversation, I guess, with him, and he must have explained, I guess, that really the law had no mechanism to properly punish these people.
And that's been the biggest issue. The police are more frustrated than anyone. When I first went to them with this issue, and there's been plenty more that would qualify for the same kind of action as that example that you showed, they basically said our hands are tied. We don't have the legislation that exists to punish people. And secondly, you mentioned the social media platforms, to find people. Do you think any of these cowards would ever say it in a workplace, would ever say it if they thought their mother would hear, would ever say it to me if they thought their boss could hear? Of course not. Being anonymous is their greatest tool, and this is what this legislation will take away from them. This will enable the Australian government to force Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to identify people who are sending messages like the one that you showed,
Erin,
to identify them to police.
The perpetrator of some of the worst abuse that you got turned out to be a father of girls himself, and yet was spewing this disgusting abuse at you.
And that was one example you used, and I tell you what, the rest of them probably wouldn't even be appropriate for morning TV. It was appalling, and, you know, I started to fear for my safety, and I've got a pretty thick skin. I think you could probably agree, Piers, you don't have to be everyone's cup of tea, but nobody deserves that kind of treatment. And this is never about me, by the way. I've been in media now for 15 years in Australia. I'm a big girl, I've got a thick skin. It would take a fair bit now to hurt me. But I look at my 2-year-old daughter and I just think there is nothing in place. I got the most amazing amount of correspondence when I started talking about this publicly. I got one letter from a teacher, a Year 4 teacher, so maybe kids around 9 or 10 years old, and he said the first 4 hours every morning in school, and I'm sure it's the same in the UK, is not spent doing English, maths or geography. It is spent dealing with the fallout of the online abuse and the things written to these kids, by adults the night before. 4 hours every morning is me dealing with traumatised children. It is terrifying. It needs to be what happens in the real world and what is accepted in the real world needs to apply online. We're not looking to appease the easily offended, or what do you call them, your woke lefties. It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's about stopping people who cross that line, who intimidate. Domestic violence, it's against the law to verbally or emotionally intimidate someone, to abuse someone. Online, it's a free-for-all, go for gold, and it's not okay.
Erin, just explain how the law has now changed in Australia as a result of your really quite heroic campaigning.
Oh, thank you. And look, there's been so many people that have campaigned. I guess I just came along at a point where the government were willing and listened. And I know that it's quite strange actually talking to a politician, having him promise you something like the Prime Minister did and then following through. It was quite bizarre. But this legislation actually, it will be introduced next year. So we need the opposition to jump on board with that. But the response to it has been incredible. It essentially, this one deals with monetary fines. So the way I see it, this is not going to clog up court systems. We've got an e-safety commission that will deal with this, and then they can refer things onto the federal court. This will not clog up our legal system, which is already very busy. You put one person on the front page of the paper, $111,000 fine for sending a message threatening to rape my 2-year-old daughter, 99% of this behaviour stops. The reason it occurs is because people are anonymous and there are no punishments at all for them.
I completely agree.
So they go for gold. One person on the front page of the paper, it solves this problem.
You're so right, and it's why I wanted to get you on the programme. I think it's such a key breakthrough in the battle against these people. They're always faceless, they're always cowardly, and it's got very ugly, and particularly against women. We had a female sports presenter in this country only last week who had to quit Twitter because she made a comment about a football club which they didn't like. The club responded, which I thought was completely out of order, and then the fans of that club spewed unbelievable abuse towards it, and she had to give up her social media. That is disgusting. So you've done a great job. Before we let you go...
what frustrates me, Sorry, just really quickly, what frustrates me is this whole narrative of, oh, just get off social media and avoid it. Yeah. No, get them off social media. Yes. She should absolutely not have to get off social media. But sorry, go on.
No, you're right. It's them that should be driven off social media, not the victims of their vile abuse. Erin, you're in Sydney. We can see the beautiful backdrop. We're very jealous, obviously. It's still early evening there, I guess. What's it like in Australia? Because we're very envious over here that we're now into another national lockdown today. You know, we can't go out for more than a bit of exercise. Everything's shut down. What is life like in Australia, and how do you think things have been handled there with the pandemic?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to send love, thoughts and prayers to all of you. It must be a really horrific situation. I guess we are so blessed here in Australia. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, and we've certainly had our share of cases, I think just over 28,000 and just over 900 deaths, but nothing on the scale that you guys have had. I think we've got to be really grateful to our government, and I'll declare my father's a senator in that government. They've absolutely made mistakes, but they've learnt from them quickly. I think they acted swiftly. They made tough decisions early on, and there's a couple of things that I think we did and we still do now that have ensured that Australia has stayed essentially not COVID-free, but has coped really, really well. And I think that was closing off the borders really quickly, the 2-week quarantine in hotel, which is mandatory with police. There were mistakes that were made with that in Victoria. And then we had contact tracing. They do it incredibly well. Within 20 minutes of someone testing positive, they know every single person they've come into contact with. So we've got really great systems in place. There have been mistakes, absolutely, but we've learnt really quickly from them. So, look, we are absolutely on edge. We had family Christmas plans that were cancelled. The borders, a lot of borders are still shut. We can't really move around, but we're certainly not in the situation that you guys are at the moment. So we are really lucky.
Practically? I mean, if you wanted to go out for a meal, or, I don't know, you wanted to go out dancing, or you wanted to hold a party. I mean, how many of these things are you able to do?
I shan't be dancing, Susanna. It's not my strength at all. And I've given up wine for January. I'm day 5, and that's a struggle.
I'm sorry.
So
I'm afraid
wine,
I declared dry January and veganuary dead as of the moment the new national lockdown was brought in. Nobody wants to...
Sean, get the wine.
Imagine being a teetotal vegan in the middle of a national lockdown. It's beyond hell.
Don't even start me.
So what
Don't
can
even
you
start
do,
me. But
Erin?
we can. Look, we can go out, we can go to shopping centres. In fact, it's only just become mandatory in Sydney to wear a mask. So now we have to wear a mask when we're going to indoor venues like shopping centres and beauty salons, that kind of thing. But we can essentially, and I'm so sorry to say this, we can basically do anything at this stage. There are still restrictions when it comes to social distancing and numbers. But if I want to go out to dinner, then I can go out to dinner. If I want to go to the nail salon, I can do that. I can go to the beach and go for a swim. There's a certain part of Sydney where they can't.
Can you do...
They do, but you can't dance, I don't think, yet. And believe, I'm 37 and I've got a 2-year-old, so I haven't been out nightclubbing in about 20 years. But I think you have to stay seated, and I don't think you can sing either, because singing obviously is a way of transmitting. And look, we've got little outbreaks and clusters at the moment. We're certainly not out of the woods, but we have a lot more freedom than you guys do.
You know, it's extraordinary. We're hearing today the government may finally be bringing in a system where people have to produce a negative test result before they can come into the UK. This is 9 months into the pandemic. Until this point, there's been no enforced quarantine. There's been no testing. There's been no, you need to have a test before you come in. No shutting down of the border. We've let 30, 40, 50 million people fly in from all around the world, often from corona-ravaged countries. And I think when there's a public inquiry into this down the line, our failure to protect our border in the way that Australia and New Zealand and other similar island countries did is going to be one of the real scandals of this. Erin, it's great to see we're jealous of the life that you guys are leading over there. I just hope everything's back in time for the Ashes, because the one thing I have got hope about is that we're going to give you lot a right shellacking when we come over at the end of the year for the Ashes. Ben Stokes,
I don't know if you've seen our batsmen
Joe
lately,
Root,
but
they're
our
coming
bowlers
to get
are good.
They're coming. Smith can't buy a run, you miracle boy. We're coming for you.
He'll find form just in time. We have the Ashes currently, Piers. And also, I'm a Liverpool fan, and I notice Arsenal's a little bit further down the ladder at the moment, so let's not talk about that either.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you lot got stuffed by Southampton last night. In fact, it was such a shock that the Southampton manager burst into tears. So I'm glad you mentioned it.